The sun barely kissed the horizon when they came. 100 warriors, silent as death itself, surrounding the orphan's cabin like shadows carved from stone. Their horses stood motionless, breath forming clouds in the cold morning air. No war paint, no weapons raised, just the weight of their presence pressing against the wooden walls where a 13-year-old boy slept, unaware that his life was about to change forever. The lead warrior's eyes never left the front door. His weathered hand rested on his horse's neck, fingers steady as carved granite. Behind him, 99 others waited with the patience of mountains. The prairie grass bent under their horses' hooves, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled, as if even nature knew something monumental was unfolding. But what happened next would silence the entire prairie for generations to come. 24 hours earlier, young Samuel had been nothing more than another forgotten soul in Clearwater Valley. The 14-year-old orphan lived alone in a cabin his father built before consumption took both parents 3 winters past. Every morning, he walked the same dusty path to the river, carrying 2 wooden buckets that seemed too heavy for his thin shoulders. The townspeople barely noticed him anymore. To them, he was just the quiet boy who sold firewood for pennies and never spoke unless spoken to. Samuel had learned early that invisible meant safe. Invisible meant no one asked questions about the holes in his boots or why he ate beans from a can most nights. That morning felt different though. The air carried a tension he couldn't name, like the moments before lightning splits the sky. As Samuel knelt by the river's edge, filling his buckets with the clear mountain water, he heard something that made his blood freeze. A low moan, barely human, coming from the cattails downstream. Samuel set down his buckets and crept toward the sound. What he found there would test everything he believed about right and wrong. A Native American man, maybe 40 years old, lay half-conscious in the mud. Blood seeped through a crude bandage wrapped around his left leg. His breathing came in short, painful gasps. The man's eyes opened, meeting Samuel's with a mixture of fear and resignation. Samuel had seen that look before, in the mirror after his parents died. It was the look of someone who expected nothing from the world but more pain. "Easy," Samuel whispered, though he wasn't sure the man understood English. "I'm not gonna hurt you." Samuel knew the stories, the warnings. Just last month, 3 homesteaders had been found dead near the northern ridge, and folks blamed the Lakota tribe that lived in the sacred hills. Fear ran through Clearwater Valley like poison in a well. Anyone caught helping a native would be branded a traitor, maybe worse. But looking at this broken man in the mud, Samuel saw only what he recognized in himself, someone the world had forgotten. Without another thought, Samuel pulled off his own shirt and tore it into strips. He cleaned the man's wound with river water and rewrapped the leg with gentle hands. The man watched him with growing wonder, as if kindness was a language he'd almost forgotten. "Can you walk?" Samuel asked, helping the man to his feet. The native nodded slowly, leaning heavily on Samuel's shoulder. Together, they made their way upstream to a hidden grove where Samuel sometimes went to escape the world's indifference. He helped the man settle against a fallen log and shared his lunch, cold biscuits and jerky that suddenly seemed like a feast when given freely. As the sun reached its peak, the man spoke his first words in broken English. "Why help enemy?" Samuel looked into those dark eyes and saw no enemy, only another human being who hurt. "You ain't my enemy," he said simply. "You're just a man who needed help." But his kindness would soon summon something far greater than gratitude. By evening, word had somehow reached Clearwater Valley. Samuel never knew how. Maybe someone saw him by the river, maybe the wounded man was spotted in the grove. But when he returned home with his water buckets, half the town waited in his front yard, faces hard as winter stone. Sheriff Briggs stepped forward, his badge catching the last rays of sunlight like a fallen star. "Boy, we heard you been consorting with savages down by the river." "He was hurt," Samuel said quietly. "Just hurt." "That hurt savage is White Bear," snarled Doc Patterson, the town's self-appointed voice of authority. "He's the war chief's own brother. You helped the enemy, boy. You helped the man whose people killed the Hendersons." Samuel's stomach dropped like a stone in deep water. White Bear. He'd helped White Bear, brother to Chief Red Cloud, leader of the most feared tribe in 3 territories. The realization hit him like a physical blow, but even then, he couldn't regret his choice. "He was dying," Samuel repeated, his voice steadier than his legs. "And now you might be too," Sheriff Briggs said, not without sympathy. "Word's already reached the hills, Samuel. They know what you did. They know where you live." That night, Samuel lay awake staring at the ceiling beams his father had cut by hand. Every sound made him jump. Wind through the trees, a coyote's distant howl, the settling of old wood. He thought about his parents, about the man by the river, about choices that seem small until they change everything. Maybe he should run, pack what little he owned and disappear into the night. But something deeper than fear kept him rooted to that cabin, to the land his father had cleared with his own hands. If death was coming, he'd meet it where he belonged. Dawn broke gray and cold, painting the world in shades of uncertainty. Samuel was splitting firewood behind his cabin when he heard them, hoofbeats, dozens of them, approaching with the steady rhythm of a funeral march. He set down his axe and walked around to the front of his cabin. What he saw there stopped his heart completely. Warriors, more than he could count, sitting motionless on their horses in perfect formation around his property. War paint streaked their faces in patterns that spoke of honor in battle. Feathers and animal skins adorned their bodies. Each man carried weapons that could end Samuel's life in a heartbeat. And at their center, mounted on a magnificent black stallion, sat Chief Red Cloud himself. Samuel had heard the stories. Red Cloud, who had driven the army from the Powder River country. Red Cloud, whose name was whispered in fear from Montana to Colorado. Red Cloud, whose brother Samuel had helped by the river just yesterday. The chief's eyes found Samuel across the yard, dark as thunderclouds and just as unreadable. For a long moment, the world held its breath. Birds stopped singing, wind stopped blowing. Even Samuel's heart seemed to pause between beats. Then, Chief Red Cloud dismounted. The movement rippled through the assembled warriors like wind through wheat. Every man there shifted slightly, hands moving imperceptibly closer to weapons. Samuel felt like a rabbit frozen in the shadow of a swooping hawk. Red Cloud walked forward with the measured pace of judgment itself. His moccasins made no sound on the hard earth. When he stopped, he was close enough that Samuel could see the silver threads in his braided hair, the weathered scars that told stories of countless battles. "You are the boy," Red Cloud said, his English careful but clear. Samuel's throat felt dry as desert sand. "Yes, sir. You helped my brother." It wasn't a question, but Samuel nodded anyway. "He was hurt. You knew who he was." Samuel shook his head. "Not until after, but it wouldn't have mattered." Something flickered in Red Cloud's eyes, surprise perhaps, or recognition. "The people of your town, they fear my brother. They call him Killer." "Maybe he is," Samuel said, finding courage he didn't know he possessed. "But yesterday by the river, he was just a man who needed help." Red Cloud studied him for what felt like hours. Behind the chief, 100 warriors waited in silence, so complete it seemed to press against Samuel's chest. Finally, Red Cloud reached into a leather pouch at his waist and withdrew something that made Samuel's breath catch. It was a necklace, not ornate or valuable by white man's standards, but clearly sacred. Carved bone and polished stone strung on sinew, each piece worn smooth by countless hands. This belonged to my grandfather and his grandfather before him. It has been worn by chiefs for 7 generations. Samuel stared at the necklace, not understanding why he was being shown such a treasure.
"My brother told me what you did," Red Cloud continued. "How you cleaned his wounds with your own shirt, how you shared your food, how you asked for nothing. The chief's voice carried the weight of mountains. In 7 generations, no white man has shown such kindness to our people without seeking something in return." Red Cloud stepped closer. "You were young. You could have been afraid, should have been afraid, but you chose mercy over safety, honor over fear." Samuel felt tears he didn't expect burning behind his eyes. "I just did what felt right." "Yes," Red Cloud said simply, "you did." The chief placed the sacred necklace around Samuel's neck. The weight of it felt like accepting a responsibility larger than himself. Around the yard, 100 warriors began to nod, not in submission, but in respect. "From this day," Red Cloud announced, his voice carrying across the prairie like thunder, "you are under the protection of our tribe. Any who to harm you must first face us all." Samuel's legs nearly gave way. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Red Cloud replied. "But remember this, courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing kindness despite fear. Yesterday, a boy showed an old chief what true bravery looks like." As Chief Red Cloud remounted his horse, Samuel realized that the assembled warriors weren't there to threaten him. They had come to honor him. One by one, each warrior nodded to Samuel before turning their horses toward home. It was a gesture of respect so profound that it left Samuel speechless. White Bear, his leg bound but his back straight, was the last to approach. He rode slowly to where Samuel stood and looked down with eyes full of something that transcended language barriers. "Brother," he said simply, and rode away. Samuel stood alone in his yard, the sacred necklace heavy around his neck, watching the dust cloud of their departure settle into stillness. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the world in shades of gold and possibility. Word of what happened spread through Clearwater Valley like wildfire. Some folks were angry, calling Samuel a traitor and worse. But others, the ones who remembered what it meant to see humanity in everyone, began to nod when they passed him on the street. Children who had once ignored him now watched with something approaching awe. Sheriff Briggs visited 3 days later, finding Samuel chopping wood behind his cabin. "Heard you got yourself some powerful friends," the sheriff said, not unkindly. Samuel touched the necklace beneath his shirt. "I just helped someone who needed it." "That simple kindness of yours might just change everything around here," Briggs mused. "Folks are starting to ask themselves what they might have done in your place. Some don't like the answer they're finding." As winter settled over Clearwater Valley, Samuel continued his quiet life, but everything had changed. He was no longer invisible, no longer forgotten. The sacred necklace he wore reminded him daily that a single act of compassion had built a bridge across centuries of mistrust. Sometimes, late at night, he would stand in his doorway and look out at the dark hills where his protectors lived. And sometimes, just sometimes, he would see the glow of distant campfires and know that somewhere out there, someone was telling the story of the orphan boy who chose kindness over fear. The land itself seemed different now, less harsh, more hopeful, as if mercy had planted seeds that would grow for generations to come. In the end, Samuel had learned the most powerful truth of all.
Sometimes the smallest act of courage echoes louder than thunder, and kindness given freely returns tenfold. Would you have risked everything for a stranger's pain? Tell us in the comments whether you believe mercy is worth the danger it might bring. Subscribe for more powerful stories like this. And click on the video on the screen to watch the next one with a twist so profound it'll change how you see the world forever.